Glad you're here on this jazzy Christmas time. Don't worry. I know a cappella music, and I'm not going a cappella because we've got a great surprise. I'm really excited about today because today we're lighting the candle of love. And as I was thinking this week about what to talk about, one thing came to my mind that the best person to talk about love would be our very own worship pastor, Reid. And so I am just going to set the table for him, and then he is going to come up for the very first time ever, and he is going to talk a little bit about what God has been speaking to him in regards to love. And the reason this is exciting, you guys, is because it has been 2-3 years maybe where I constantly go to Stephen like, hey Stephen, you want to preach this week? Hey Stephen, you want to preach this week? And every time it is just an adamant no. Adamant no. This Monday, we meet on Mondays and talk about the upcoming Sunday service, and I came up and I said, Stephen, are you ready to talk about love? And he didn't say anything. And I thought, okay, well, what's going on? And he said, well, you know, it's funny, is on the way over to the meeting, he goes, I just felt like, gosh, maybe I should speak this week. And that was all I needed to hear. That was all I needed to hear. Because let's face it, guys, God is doing some incredible things this year, and in the life of our church, in the life of so many people in here. And I by no means have a monopoly on God speaking to me, right? God is speaking to all of us. God is doing great things in so many people's lives here that if anybody comes to me and says, you know what, it's on my heart, I need to share this, like, by all means, right? Kathy does it all the time, right, Kathy? It's good. It's good because the church isn't about just one person, right? It's not just about the pastor. It's about what God's doing in the lives of his people. And so as we talk about love, the reason that this is so important, right? The reason that we talk about hope and peace and love is because these things in Advent, they're things that we need to be aware of. There are things that we need to be reminded of. And the reason love is important is because just like hope and peace, it's a word that is used too often and understood too little, right? And just to prove my point, right, I wanted to do a little experiment, and I'm glad everyone's here today to help me with this experiment, okay? I am going to say the words, I love. And I want you to just, whatever the first thing is, that first clean thing that comes to your mind, I want you to just shout it out, all right? So, now, I want you to know, I will shout out too, so don't be afraid. Some of you are just like, oh, this is one of those tricks where Richard's going to say 1, 2, 3, go, and I'm going to be the only one talking. Like, that's not it, all right? Because as I was thinking about this week, right, when we think about love in our society, there are so many things that we say we love. And yet we miss the point of what love is. And as we go and we talk about love in this Advent season, I want us to get in the framework of, man, my heart is so distracted by so many other things that are trying to pull my attention away from God, right? And I think that there's no greater season than right now, right, with those distractions about what this season is about and about what it could mean, right? This is about Jesus, but for so many of us, right, how many of us are stressed out right now because we haven't started Christmas shopping yet? Anybody? Boom, right? It freaks us out. And the reality is it should not freak us out. But it does. So many distractions. So many things pulling our hearts away from what this is really about. All right? So, I'm going to say, I love, and I just want us to, whatever comes to your mind. All right? And let me say this too. If you say Jesus, you're a liar, right? That is not, you've had time to sit and think about it. Yeah, what should I say in church? I love Jesus, right? And so what we're going to do is and Max is back there and he's taking notes on which of you need counseling. All right, so we're gonna address this after the service. So on the count of 3, I will say I love, and then you guys will just. All right, so I love. 1, 2, 3. Hawaii.
I love my wife.
Ah, all right. You just waited. All right. So, okay. So the good thing about me yelling is I didn't hear any of that, right? But I know what I love. Like, first thing that pops into my mind is Hawaii, right? I love Hawaii, and it's not like I even go there all the time, but I've been there once or twice, and I love it, and the whole idea of being there just fills me, and that's the only word I can use to describe it is love. But again, that's not what love is. And like I said, so many things come into our lives that distract us. And in this season of Advent, right, this season of us pausing and taking a break from everything else and focusing on Advent. And that word Advent means arrival, right? It means the coming, the arrival of Jesus. And what that tells me is that for God, the way He chose to reveal His love to us, the way He chose to reveal His love to the world was His presence, His arrival, right? God's not this God who sits far off and just kind of shouts down to humanity, hey, don't forget I love you. It's not that. It's His presence, right? And that's what we celebrate. That's the God that we celebrate in this season and hopefully throughout the year, is this God who is not far off, but He has come. It's that season of Advent, that arrival, that His presence has come in a tangible fashion, in a physical way into our lives to change it forever. Right? And again, this is how God, from the very beginning, revealed His love to His people. If you think about in the Garden of Eden, when man and woman were first created, it tells us that God would walk with them in the cool of the garden. Right? It was His presence. He created these people and He loved them by being with them. Throughout the Old Testament, God's love was revealed in the fact that no matter how often Israel strayed, no matter how often they walked away, no matter how often they upset God and said, God, we're done with you, we're giving up, and we're following other things. No matter how many times those things in their hearts got distracted, God always called them back. His presence, His love called His people back. In the book of Isaiah, we're given the prophecy that we talk a lot about during this season of Advent. And in Isaiah chapter 7, it says, "And the virgin shall conceive and give birth to a son, and he shall be called Emmanuel." And most of us have probably spent enough time in church on Christmas, and we know that Emmanuel means God with us, right? This is the sign that will be given to you. This is the sign of God's love. It is that God is with us. It is His presence. And deep down, right, we know this too. Deep down as humans, as created beings, created in the image of God, we understand this idea of presence showing love, this idea of just being there showing love. Before Eve was created, God tells us in Genesis that it's not good for man to be alone.
Amen.
Right? There's a joke in there somewhere, right? It's a good punchline. It's not good for man to be alone. And so Eve was created. As God begins to work His history of salvation, He begins with a people. And at first they start off small and they continue to grow, but it's this following God is a social thing. It's something that we do together. We are not only in God's presence, but in presence with each other, bearing one another's burdens, being a light and an encouragement to one another. We need love in our lives. We need presence in our lives. Not with a T, but with a C-E. right? Not only God, but from others. And as I thought about this week, as I begin to hand things over to Stephen, I think that God shows his love to us through his presence for two reasons. One, to let us know that we aren't alone. The first reason he comes to us is to let us know that he is not some distant, far-off God. He is here, he is now, he is in our lives, he is accessible to all and for all. That we haven't been forgotten. That we matter to him. Henry Nouwen, who in one of his books writes that the greatest gift that we are given is the fact that when we face difficulty in this world, we have the realization that Jesus has already crossed that bridge and overcome it. Right? This idea that as we face difficulty in our lives, we are grounded in the fact and in our faith that says, is this anything more than what Christ faced? And the answer is no. It's as if you come across this bridge that is barely hanging on, and you imagine like an Indiana Jones movie, right? It's made out of old vines and pieces of wood, and the first step you take and it just drops down into the crocodile-infested river below. And you're sitting there and you're looking at your life and you're looking at these difficulties and you think, I can't do this. This is way too hard. And all of a sudden, across the bridge, Jesus waves his hand at you and says, hey, it's okay. I've crossed it. And not only does he say he crossed it, but I picture him kind of bounding, right? If you ever at Tom Sawyer's Island at Disneyland, right? And those bridges that are on the water, right? And you freak your friends out by boom, boom. And you come across and he's bouncing back across over to you so he can take your hand and bring you across this bridge of difficulty that we face. And that's what Henry Nouwen says is the joy of our faith, that we have this Savior who gets it, who understands our pain and has been there. In my own life, right, these past few weeks, here's a little confession. Mackenzie and I have been having a few epic fights. All right, and don't worry, I got her permission to share this. All right, this is like
you in trouble?
I know, man. No, I got the permission. So I don't want you going up to Mackenzie after the service and be like, "I'm so sorry you shared that. That's so messed up." But here's the reality, right? Around this time of year, for us, family is hard, right? Not our immediate family, not us and our kids, but family, right? And a lot of you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Family is hard for us. This idea that you don't see them all year, you don't talk to them all year, and then at the holidays, we're supposed to all get together, laugh, have a great time, and pretend like nothing ever happened. And then you leave and you don't see each other for the rest of the year. Right? It's hard. Right? And another thing that's hard is, we talked about last, I had to take a pay cut. And that's hard. That's hard for anybody. That's hard for anybody. And we dealt with both of those things in the past few weeks. And here's the reality is, as a man, I want to solve those problems right now, right? I want to say, I see my wife struggling. I see her mad at me, and I don't like her mad at me. And so I want to fix things. And I've got all these solutions. They'll be like, hey, here's what we can do. Here's how we can solve this problem. Here, we need to set up this meeting and that meeting and do all of these things. And what I realized, what Mackenzie helped me realize, is that she doesn't necessarily want solutions. At least not initially. Right? What she wants is someone to hold her close and say, you know what? This sucks. You know what? I get it. These things are hard. Life is hard. And I understand. And I'm sorry that we're going through this, and I love you. Right? And this is what our fights are about. It's me coming to the realization like, oh, this is all you need? And it again, that realization that she wants me to love her with my presence, not with my solutions, but just to know that I get it. To let her know that she's not alone in that hurt. To let her know that I care about her. And that's what God does for us. Right? And the second reason I think God reveals his love through his presence is to make us better. Right? As the angels told the shepherds out in the fields at night that Jesus had been born, they said a Savior had been born and that it was good news for all people. Right? This idea that the presence of God, the love of God, the Son of God had been born to us this day in the city of David was good news because it saved. It was the opportunity that all people would be saved. That's God's plan. All would be saved. God's love through the gift of his Son changes us. It saves us. It reconciles us. It sanctifies us. And it teaches us. That's what God's presence does in our lives. Last Sunday, my son Asher and I put up our Christmas lights. Right? And we had such a good time. Right? We don't have a lot of Christmas lights to put up. But we put him up, and he was my light tester. We sat there, and we were thinking about how we were going to wrap the lights around so that they could actually reach a plug. And I sat there with him, and we both sat there kind of just staring at it like men do sometimes. We're working things out in our head. And I said, Asher, you know what's going to help us do this better? You know what's going to help us think better? I said, hot cocoa. And he goes, yeah, Daddy, why don't you go in and you make some cocoa, Daddy, and I'll stay here and I'll keep testing these lights. Right? And we got them up, and they're awesome, and it looks fantastic, and it was but it was so much fun. But the reason I tell that story is, like, I could have done the lights by myself, right? I probably would have got them done quicker. I probably would have not had to make hot cocoa, but the fact was, it was me being with my son.
Amen.
It was me hopefully teaching him what it looks like as a man, and I know that's a very small portion of what it means to be a man, but putting up Christmas lights on your house, right? Doing things around the house, doing things that make the family happy. And that presence of me in his life is me hoping. And it's not only putting up Christmas lights, but all the time I spend with my kids is hopefully me teaching them what it means to be loved by God, to love others, to be better people. And ultimately, as we celebrate love in Advent, that was God's point of love. Amen. The song that we sang, the reckless love, right? It's reckless. It doesn't make sense. Because why would God do that? Why would he give his presence? Why would he love us that much? And it's because he wants us to be better. He wants us to know him. He wants us to be saved, to be reconciled. And he wants us to know that we're not alone. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Stephen Reid, who probably loves people more and better than anybody else I know. And so I'm just going to embarrass you right now, man. But I am so excited to hear him. And Stephen, take it away.
Thank you. Well, for a second, I thought he was just going to plow right through it. I got a little excited. Thought he was going to preach the rest of the morning and I wouldn't have to get out here. But like Richard said, if you know Richard, if you've been around here, he's probably asked you to get up here and preach or share something at some point. And my answer has always been a hard no, because a lot of you are probably thinking that I get up here every Sunday and it should be really easy. I'm like 4 feet away from where I normally stand, but this is completely different. I'm completely nervous. I don't like talking. I don't like talking in front of people. If you've noticed, I don't do much of that. I focus on the music, which is probably something I need to do a little more of, is sharing why we sing songs. So that's what I'm going to do this morning. Like Richard mentioned, we've been singing the song Reckless Love for a while now. And when I first heard it, I fell in love with it. But at the same time, it was a little iffy because it talks about this word reckless. And I looked it up online like I usually do, and I researched it a little bit before we play it. And I found out that it wasn't just me. It's actually like kind of a controversial thing in churches right now, is to be singing this song, Reckless Love. And if you were here when I did it the first time, I tried to explain that I don't want to call God reckless, and I'm not standing up here saying that God is reckless or in any way, doesn't have a plan for us. But it's a term that we as humans have just tried to explain this love that we don't really understand, that we don't really get. Richard's talking about presence, and a lot of times that's something hard to define. It's hard to, you feel it, but you don't know how to talk about it. And so as humans, we do this a lot. We try to quantify our feelings, and if you look at science, God created everything. So it's nothing new when we tell ourselves, that our atoms are made of these little particles and stuff like that. God already knew that, but it's us finding these things out for ourselves and labeling them and trying to wrap our head around stuff that just isn't comprehensible. And that's how God planned it. Let me get my notes out because I started without them, and that's dangerous. So the first thing I want to say is that God is not reckless. I looked up reckless, and most of you, it's kind of a negative term when you think about it. It means of a person or their actions without thinking or caring about the consequences of an action. It's audacious, it's brash, it's careless, it's daring, it's foolhardy, hasty, ill-advised, imprudent, negligent, thoughtless, incautious, rash, regardless what, it goes on. It's not really a positive thing being reckless. But whoever wrote the song, I think his name was Corey Asbury or something like that, he chose this term to describe God's love. He didn't describe God as reckless because, as many of you know, God had a plan for us before we were even born, before we were created. God had a plan. Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." He had plans for us, and not just plans, he had good plans. He had plans to prosper us, he has plans of hope, and he has plans of a future. So God knew before he created you, what your life was going to be like, and he had good thoughts for you. So how can we describe God's love as reckless? It's not found in the Bible. So when I started trying to research this, it's not like I could look up how many times the word reckless was used in the Bible, because it's not. The word love is used a lot in the Bible, which made it even harder for me, because there's so many passages on love, there's so many different ideas about love, and Richard talked about God's presence being one of the major ones, and I'm going to talk about more how God loves us and how we're called to love other people, which in my mind is pretty well summed up as a reckless love. The first verse I looked at was Ephesians 3:18 and 19, and this made it even more difficult. Paul's writing to the church at Ephesus, and he says, "I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know that this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God." So, that was a little discouraging, because it says right there that love that surpasses knowledge. There's no way I can define it. There's no way that we can sit here and just, I can explain to you in numbers or measurements of how God loves us, because he tells you right there that it surpasses knowledge. And again, I mentioned science. There's so many things that God created that we just will never wrap our head around. And that's the way he designed it. In that verse it says how wide, long, high, and deep the love of Christ is. I'm kind of a carpenter. I did cabinets for 10 years and been in construction, and I know how to measure something. You measure the width, the height, and the length, but what Paul is talking about here, he added depth, and that's what's unmeasurable, is the depth of God's love. Something we can't put a tape measure on. It's another dimension. It's another feeling that we as humans, we don't really have, but we try to understand. And God calls us to love like him, love like Jesus loved. And how can we do that unless we understand it? So I looked through the Bible. I found a couple parables that Jesus talked about love. And the first one, I'm going to skip something real quick. The first one I read was the parable of the lost son. So if you'll turn to Luke 15:11. He gives us an example of the love of God. So verse 15, it says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.' Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep." Oh, I'm reading the wrong one. Look at that. Jesus tells this parable. "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me a share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of the country, who sent him to feed his fields and pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, and he was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put the ring on his finger and the sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's leave a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard the music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So the father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never give me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when the son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and now he's found.'" So the story Jesus tells points out how God loves us. And, not only did the father accept his son back after he left and took all his money and squandered it away, but he celebrated it. He gave up his best for his lost son and rejoiced in his return. He killed the best calf he had and served dinner and just had a huge party. And just like that, God goes out of his way to not just love us, but he just loves us with everything he has. You go back to the song we're going to sing, Reckless Love, and the bridge says, "There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me." So there's nothing we can do to lose God's love. There's nothing we can do that he won't go after us and seek us. It's a love that is active. It's a love that's, like Richard said, present. And it's something that we have trouble comprehending. So in the background, there's also another son. And when he hears that his younger brother is being celebrated, he goes to his dad and he says, "Hey, I've been here the whole time. I've done what you told me for who knows how long, and you've never even killed a little sheep for me. You go and kill a fattened calf for my younger brother." And so he's mad, which I understand a little bit. My brother's older. I have one older brother, and growing up, he was the first to get into everything, and he seemed to get into a lot. And I, being the good little church goer that I was, me and my friends, we got in trouble because we skateboarded too far away from home and stuff like that, and we didn't drink or party or do any of that stuff. So I always felt that my brother, who did a little more partying and stuff like that, always got it easy. I remember one time we lived down in Seal Beach at the time, and my brother had a 65 Ford Falcon. It was pretty sweet. I had just got my license, and my dad was letting me drive his like 90 Chrysler New Yorker. It had like the leather on the back of it that was all shredded and wood grain and all this. I mean, it was fancy, but it wasn't a Ford Falcon. And they fixed that thing up. They painted it. They redid the inside. It was beautiful. So he drove that around, and I always thought that was pretty cool. And one day, I woke up, I think it was a Saturday morning, and sitting on the couch watching cartoons, and my brother comes home, and I think he was in high school at the time, and he comes down, because he had his own room upstairs too, which I thought was unfair. Because it was like this little loft upstairs, and then it was attached to the deck, and he even had like a staircase in the back, which he said he never used, but he could get out of the house and no one would know and get back in to that staircase, but I was down next to my parents' room. But anyway, he came down the stairs, and he was kind of like holding his mouth funny like this, and I noticed it first, and I looked, and as he moved his thing, he had a big old lip ring on his lip. And I saw that, and I knew it was going to come. So my dad hated tattoos. He was completely against tattoos, piercings, all that stuff. And so my brother comes downstairs, and we all look at him, and he says to my dad, he says, "Oh," he goes, "we have something to talk about." And my dad looked at him and said, "No, we don't." And he said, "Get in the garage." And so he actually went in the garage, and I remember watching, he got some rusty needle-nose pliers and pulled it out. It was a huge fight. But he threatened him and said, "I'm going to take away your car." And I remember sitting under the blanket watching cartoons, laughing, thinking to myself, like, yes, I'm going to get the Falcon. Because he's in so much trouble, they're going to take it away. I have my license. I'm going to get the Falcon. He's never going to get to drive again. But that's not what happened. He was grounded maybe. I don't know. But he's got the staircase, so it's not like it matters. So like a couple of days later, like it was no big thing. And, for me, I was like, well, the worst thing I ever did is I was a terrible student. If you look at my notes, they're not organized because I'm just terrible at studying and writing papers and stuff like that. I was a terrible student. I got C's and D's and a couple of F's, probably. So anyway, I was a terrible student, so that's what I always got in trouble with, and my parents would always just not let me hang out with my friends with men. All my friends were at church, so they wouldn't let me go to church. So I was always like, what the heck? My brother gets away with all this stuff, and he gets to keep his Falcon. So thinking about this, I saw the story in the background as, the son just being mad about this and how his brother got all the love, but then you look later and what his father says. He says, "Don't worry." He says, "I know you've been here the entire time. I know that you are probably the good son. Don't worry. You're going to get my inheritance. But right now, we're going to celebrate that your lost son has come back." And to me, what I heard was like, we'll deal with the consequences later. But we're going to love on him right now. And so that right there is just, I think it just teaches us that as God's people, he's got our back. Like he knows that we've been there, and he knows that we've been by his side. And when someone comes into our church who's maybe broken and, drug addict or whatever, he's got our backs so that we can go and love on these people. So that we can go and we can pour everything we have into them. And sometimes it means, for us as believers, part of a congregation, it means leaving our church, leaving people that we love and going and hanging out, spending time with these undesirable people. I put the picture that I think Max shared it first of, what do we call it, Gangsta Jesus? Gangsta Jesus. It's in there, but nobody's back there to put it up. I had it in there, and because to me, it sums it up. We're to be hanging out with the undesirables. We're to be hanging out with unbelievers, sinners, like Jesus did. And for the rest of the church, it's not something to be mad about. It's not something to be worried about, that maybe our pastor or our leaders or something like that are out feeding the homeless or out hanging out with these undesirable people. So the next parable, which I started reading before, the parable of the lost sheep. That's basically what the author of the song was focusing on. The chorus goes, "Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. It chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away." So he's talking about the 99 sheep. And we find this in Luke, where Jesus tells the parable of the lost sheep. Luke 15. It's shorter, don't worry. So Jesus told this parable. "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after his lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 religious persons who do not need to repent." So the idea of reckless love, this pretty much sums it up right here. So you have 99 sheep and one of them runs away. It seems pretty reckless to turn your back on those 99 sheep. And it says leave them in an open field. So it's not like he put them away in a pen and he leaves the 99 sheep in an open field and he goes off to find this one lost sheep. And I'm not a shepherd. I've never had sheep. I was going to look up how much a sheep costs, but I forgot. I'm sure they're pretty expensive because they give you wool and some people eat them. I hear the young ones are more expensive. But if you think about it in terms of money, if you had $100,000, and you lost 1,000, you're not going to leave your 100,000 on a curb somewhere in the city and go try to find $1,000. This just wouldn't be worth it. It wouldn't be very smart, and it would just be something that's just extremely reckless. You're gonna throw away $99 to go over $1,000, but that's not what God does. He loves every one of us, and He loves each one of us uniquely, and He's going to go after us, and He's going to find us. When we're lost, He's not going to leave us there. He's going to go find us. He's going to leave His 99 that are good, that He's been teaching. He's going to leave His disciples. He leaves His disciples because they're supposed to be good by themselves, but they often weren't. He's going to leave them, and He's going to go, and He's going to hang out with the sinners. He's going to preach to them because they're the ones that need it. So I feel like this term reckless love, us as a church, us as a small church, who's kind of in a place where we're looking to the future, we're kind of looking for what we're going to do, what we're going to be. We're probably going to move from here, and we don't really know where we're going to go. But to me, this all tells us that maybe we should be thinking a little bit recklessly. Maybe we should be thinking a little bit differently. Max shared a video with us a couple days ago, Francis Chan. I know you've all probably heard of him, but I didn't really know what was going on recently, is that he started a mega church in his house, and it grew to like 5,000 people or something, and he just became the pastor of this huge mega church. And he left. And seems kind of reckless, right? So he leaves this big church because he starts feeling that it's not biblical for him to be the only one up there standing preaching the word, and all these 5,000 people come every Sunday, and they tithe, and I'm sure the church had $1 million budget, but that's it. They would leave. So they were basically coming and paying to hear him preach the word, and he just thought that wasn't biblical. We're all supposed to use our gifts. We're all supposed to contribute, and we're all supposed to show love. And so he left that church, and now I think he's in San Francisco, and he made it sound like it was kind of like a home church deal. Like he had a lot of home churches going, and then he would train basically pastors who would pastor these little small home churches. And it was really interesting to listen to, because that's kind of where we're at. We don't have a mega church. But how Richard has shared was something like I agree with 100%. He shared one time that when we reach a couple hundred people, we're not going to be looking to expand our church. We're not going to be looking to grow. We're actually, at that point, going to start sending people to make new churches. And to me, that really hit me, because that's kind of the way I feel about worship. This morning we did things a little differently. I didn't plug anything in, and we kind of went acoustic, and Max did an experiment last week where he asked everybody to move forward, which I didn't do. Because I like to sit in the back too. I told him after that, we're a church of the backsitters, so it's okay. Like, I know he didn't mean it like you have to sit closer, because a lot of our people here are backsitters, and that's perfectly fine. I love that. If I didn't have to be up here, I'd be in the back there with my head against the wall. What was I saying? This is the fear of like just boop, it's gone. Francis Chan.
You're talking about church.
Doing things differently.
Yeah,
with worship. We don't need a sound system. We don't need anything like that. We have all we need to have church. And I've been thinking lately, like, we don't even need a building. I mean, we have everything we need. We have people who have gifts. We have people who have gifts of preaching, which is probably not me. We have people who, who have gifts of leading worship and everything like that. And most importantly, most of us, we all have the gift of loving one another.
Amen.
And one of the things Francis Chan said was, imagine if everyone in the church was using their gifts, all those 5,000 people, and they all loved each other. And we say we love one another. But do we? I mean, do we truly love one another like God does? Like we would go out of our way, we'd do anything to pick someone up? And I'm encouraged by this, because since the moment I came to Crosspoint, I've felt that. I tell you a little bit about my musical background. I have very little. I took piano lessons when I was 7 until junior high, when you pick a band instrument, and I played the trumpet. So through high school until the end of my junior year, because my senior year I didn't want to do it anymore. My mom was really mad at me. I played trumpet in the marching band. And not until around then did I start getting involved in worship in church. We used to do, at my old church, we used to do a youth Sunday where the youth group would come up and run the whole service. So they needed people to do worship and play in the band. They needed somebody to speak. And so I jumped on the drums, and I never really played drum set before. So I gave it a shot. And the main worship leader of the church after that asked me if I just wanted to play every Sunday. And I said, sure, I'll give it my best shot. And so from then on, for like my whole junior high, high school, into college, I went to that church for probably 20 years. I was playing drums on Sunday mornings. I started to pick up the guitar, and I started to lead worship for the youth group. Me and Ashley were youth leaders after we left the youth group for a while. And so I would lead worship with the youth, and it wasn't very good, but they don't know the difference. So I never used a microphone or anything, and I sang, which was the first for me. I think I only led worship on that next youth Sunday. I was the youth worship leader, so I led it then. But when I came to Crosspoint, I was kind of like, I got there and it was a huge rock band experience, which is not what we do now. But I thought to myself, they have all their musicians and they're not going to need anybody else. And so I kind of signed my name where it says if you want to do anything, and I put that I play drums and whatever. And immediately got a response from Richard and the old worship leader. And that next Sunday, he said, yeah, come to our rehearsal and play drums with us, and we'll see what happens. And after that, I was put on the schedule, and I was playing drums with this worship band. And it kind of like fell into my lap. And I just felt this love that I went there thinking like, oh, they're not going to need me. They're this up-and-coming church plant. They have all these musicians, and they're great at what they do. We used to have some great musicians, not that we don't now. We have Vincent.
Sorry.
We have Vincent. Anyway, I was all of a sudden thrown into this, and it was great. And then he started pushing me. He said, have you ever led worship? And I said, well, a couple times. He said, do you want to? And I said, no. Like, you want to preach? No, never. Never want to preach. That's not me. But I did it a couple times, and it was fun. And, there was a lot of gifted musicians behind me. And then when our old worship pastor decided to leave, kind of like getting up here and talking, I just felt like, I could do that. I think. So here I am. But what I was saying was like my music ability and teaching is very minimal. I fake a lot up here. And I can't explain it other than, God's gifted me with something. And even though it's not something that I would want to be doing, I don't want to be up here. I've told Richard a couple times I've been to Catholic churches where the choir's in the back up on the patio. And so you're facing the pulpit and you're hearing this beautiful music and choir and singing and you can't see who's doing it. I kind of want to try that. So if you get here and we're in the back and you guys are in the front, we'll give it a shot. The speakers will be up front, so you won't even know the difference. But I'm encouraged by this because when I first came to Crosspoint, I felt this love. I felt this feeling, and I think that's what we're called to. We're called to this reckless love. We're called to something different, which is just loving one another. It's not even that hard. But churches, these mega churches, I've been to a lot. I went on a crusade to learn how to be a worship leader and would go visit all these churches, and I didn't like any of them, these mega churches, because there was you could tell people were just there on Sunday to hear a message and leave and go home. You couldn't even hear people singing. If this room was filled with 3,000 people, and we're up here, even if we did have the speakers on, you wouldn't be able to hear us. So why do you walk into a church with 3,000 people? They have a huge sound system and a huge stage and lights and everything like that, and you can still hear the band. Just people aren't worshiping. It made me think when I started this, if I had 2,000 of you guys worshiping, I wouldn't be able to hear myself, which is encouraging because like we did today, we don't have any, and I could hear you guys singing, which is great. Because then I don't have to sing as loud. It's not about me. I want to be in the back. So this all being said, I think that we're called as a church to be a little reckless, to do things a little bit differently. And I don't know what that means. We've been praying a lot as elders about where we're supposed to go and what God has for us and what it's going to look like, and we still have no idea. But what if it was something different? What if it was just us getting together? It doesn't matter where, worshiping and loving each other. Richard calls us the church for the broken, and I love that, but I've always felt like, I didn't have that upbringing. I didn't have those issues that some of us come here with, these deep, like, drug addict issues and stuff like that. But I think more than just the broken, we're a church of the unloved. I think a lot of us have come from churches that we don't feel that. I know our last church, it became a little crazy, and me and Ashley didn't feel like we had a place there. And I know a lot of these mega churches, you walk in and walk out, you don't have to talk to anybody. You don't get that love. So, maybe that's what we're called to be, is just the church that loves one another. And imagine what it would look like. I think that's all I have. See, because I didn't even say what I was going to say.
The Spirit led you, brother.
I was going to talk about John 3:16 and all that good stuff. Let me try. Let me see if I missed something. No, I skipped right to the end. That was perfect. Thank you. So let's pray.
Amen.
Dear God, just thank you for this morning, and thank you for just giving us the opportunity to do things a little differently. I just pray that as a church, as we go through this transition of finding something new, finding something different, God, that we just don't forget to root whatever we do, God, in love. So I'm supposed to come up with a final thought. I'm just going to leave you with this verse we just sang. We are his portion and he is our prize, drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. Grace is an ocean. We're all sinking. Go and love one another. Thank you.